Why Suffer by Ann Wigmore. How I Overcame Illness and Pain Naturally. This is her autobiography. I'm a big fan of Ann Wigmore. I stan Ann Wigmore. She was great. I really like her version of her version of raw vegan that really emphasizes the living foods, sprouting and fermenting. And she's the one who popularized wheatgrass juice. She talks about that in here. And yeah, I like all that. Big fan. I hope that someday I can grow my own wheatgrass and give it a shot. Because I've never had the pleasure. But I wanted to talk a little bit about this book. It's really good. It's not that long. How long is it? 177 pages. So I knocked it out in a few days. I stayed up way too late reading it the first night because the first half of this book, she's talking about her early life in Lithuania. And she grew up during World War I. And it's just so crazy. Like the things that people have gone through, going through wars and whatnot. She just lived in some little village in Lithuania, and they had all these soldiers coming through and doing terrible things. And then, after the war, things were really hard, but then they started having the German currency, and things seemed to be very prosperous for a while, and then we all know how that ended. So things got really hard again. But she was eventually able to immigrate to America as a teenager, and things were really hard then too. And it seems like she had a really hard life, but a lot of really amazing things happened as well. It's definitely worth a read. So I just want to talk about a few things in this book that were giving me some big things. So Ann Wigmore was a sickly child, and she was raised by her grandmother. She was left in the care of her grandmother as a baby, and her parents immigrated to America. And in the first parts of the book, when she's talking about growing up in Lithuania, and she talks about her grandmother, who was sort of like the village healer. And everyone who was sick or injured, and injured soldiers often, because it was wartime, would come to her for help. And so Anne's talking about a lot of the things that her grandmother did to help her heal from her just sickliness as a baby and young child, and then also ways that she helped heal others. When I was about 4, I was put to work outside in our garden. There was much to do. Shoes, of course, were unknown to my feet, and as the weather grew chilly, woolen cloths wrapped tightly served as their only covering. During that first summer, I was sometimes carried to the nearby swamp, to a spot where the freshets of the preceding spring had laid quantities of black mud along the banks. At a place where this wet and oozy mass was level with the surface of the sluggish stream, my grandmother would strip me to the skin and push me down into the warm, soft, yielding stickiness until only my head remained in view. Then she would step away and glance up and down the swamp. If you hear the dogs barking, she would caution, climb out. Don't wait to wash yourself. Hide under those bushes over there until things quiet down. I will come and get you. Then she would leave me, and for hours my body would be drinking in the wonderful, soothing warmth from Mother Earth. My grandmother remarked, "The earth is filled with health-giving substances, and when the soil is wet and warm, it benefits the human body in ways no other method can duplicate." Often, grandmother would sit me under a great oak tree in the yard and cover me with leaves. Leaving me with a thin cloth bag filled with crushed rye grains to nurse on, she did her chores inside the house. If I was asleep when night came, she would cover me with a woolen blanket and leave me for the night. My first meals, and the meals I consumed for several years until I was strong enough to go outside and do my share of the community work, consisted of gruel made from crushed rye grain and diluted goat's milk. The rye would be threshed that morning on the barn floor, ground to powder between stones and mixed with the milk, still warm from the body of the goat. The live grain will help you, my grandmother would say, and so will the live milk. It is the only food a baby should have. Grandmother used crushed grass frequently. She would grind the grass under the stones, place the pulp in freshly drawn goat milk, and would pour it into gunshot or saber wounds before she would stitch the flesh together with an ordinary thread and needle. As I grew older, I often had to tie the pain-maddened sufferers in the heavy wooden chair so that no movement was possible during the sewing. Grandmother had no drugs to ease the pain. All during the time I was an assistant to my grandmother, the only liquids we used were warm water, crushed grass, and fresh goat's milk. But that combination seemed sufficient for all purposes. I do not remember a single instance where a sore or cut was not helped. I really love reading about the experiences of people who lived in the past. And it gives me this kind of feeling of like we've gained so much. I don't ever want to fall into the trap of not being grateful for the time and the place in which I live, because although there are certainly plenty of difficulties that are unique to the modern world that we're living in, and sometimes I struggle with like feeling resentful about that. Like, I live in peace, and if I were to get shot or something or injured, I could go to the hospital and they would like pump me full of pain meds and I wouldn't have to endure such suffering. And like, I mean, really, I'm only alive because I was able to have C-sections for my babies. Like my oldest daughter, I had placenta previa with her, which means that the placenta is covering the cervical opening. And most women in the past who had that just died. Them and their babies died because it just causes like hemorrhaging, and baby can't get out, and the placenta hemorrhages, and like, yeah, you freaking die. And I'm alive, so I don't ever want to not be grateful for that, and that I live in a time of peace, you know. But then there's also this feeling of like we've gained so much, but we've also lost some really special things, like the knowledge of how to care for yourself, to provide for yourself, to care for yourself and others in sickness and injury in ways that like, self-sufficient ways that we just don't know about anymore. You know, she talks a lot about, I knocked the book down, all the different ways that her grandmother used herbs, grass, and, the goat's milk, and to heal different ailments. And it's like all of that stuff, people just in the past, they just knew that. And because it was passed down from generation to generation, how to grow your own food and gather your own medicine, and put it to use, and, take care of your herds of sheep and goats, and like all of that knowledge was passed down because you had to have it or else you would die. And then the Industrial Revolution came along and we didn't need that knowledge anymore, and so it stopped being passed down. And so now it's like a major undertaking to try and regain that knowledge and be able to put it to use in our own lives. It's something that I've been trying to work towards, over these years as I've gotten more interested in health after starting to have kids. And it's like there's probably many things that we're just never gonna recover. Many traditional knowledge that might just be gone forever because it stopped being needed to be used. So it's like, we've gained some pretty amazing things, but we've lost some pretty amazing things too. When Ann was just 7 years old, she had to start being responsible for taking the herds of sheep and goats to the far meadow where there was grazing grounds. And it's so crazy. My oldest daughter's about to turn 7. It's like thinking about her just being gone all day with a herd of sheep and goats. It's like, it's unbelievable. Like, again, like so hard. Like, what a hard life. But then also she got to experience really amazing things too that most of us don't, where she's just out there in nature all the time. She talks a lot about communing with wild animals, sitting down to eat her lunch of rye straw bread and goat cheese, and which I think is just, that's basically what they ate. And just having, wild animals coming up, and she would give them little tidbits and stuff and form relationships with them. Most of us don't get to have that kind of experience. So it's like, we've mastered a lot of nature, but lost our closeness to it at the same time, At some point, I'm not sure how old she was here, but she started working for another family who, I think there's 3 sisters, and their mother was an invalid, and so she started helping them and caring for her, and trying to make money to buy a ticket to immigrate to America. And she talks about their Saturday night bath. And so I'd like to read this to you. Our Saturday night bath, as regular as the coming of that special day in the week, and all of us, the invalid mother, the 3 sisters, and I, took the ablutions, I don't know what that word means, together in the square, unpainted building, which roosted like a sentinel at the beginning of the rye field, some 300 feet from the main house. Winter, summer, spring, and fall, it was a never-ending weekly ritual. In warm or chilly weather, in summer's heat or winter's blizzards, year in and year out, we made that inevitable journey after nightfall. That invigorating, blood-tingling custom probably had much to do with our ability to toil continuously from sunup to sundown. But our bath did not include the usual round wooden tub, the bar of hard homemade yellow soap, and the warm kitchen. In fact, the Saturday night bath, as I recall it, was entirely without soap, and was also minus any cloths to wipe away the grime of the fields, the dust of the threshing floor, and the ordinary stable dirt. These cleansing episodes only occurred in that square building by the rye field, a building used for no other purpose. The preparations were lengthy, and the labor was supplied by the youngest sister, who was known as the housekeeper, as a special Saturday chore, which must be wedged in between her other labors. In the middle of this ruggedly built bathhouse was a bed of yellow sand surrounded by board planking. In the center of this sand had been erected years before, with much painstaking labor, an arch of great stones, balanced expertly without mortar, towering several feet into the air. These stones, originally carted from the bed of the nearby creek, had been so arranged that a great fire could be kindled at their base. If the fire was carefully fed all day Saturday with wood, by the time darkness fell, the mass of rock was almost white with heat, and the piles of ashes about the base were cherry red. There was no chimney in this box-like structure, but the smoke escaped through vents along the eaves. With the entrance door ajar, there was plenty of draft, but even so, the atmosphere inside was blazing hot, an eye-watering mixture of dust, smoke, and air. After dark, the 5 of us, as devoid of raiment as were the early inhabitants of the Garden of Eden, would leave the house and make our way slowly down the path, the 2 younger girls helping the weakened mother. In fair or foul weather, the routine never varied. Arriving at the door, Margaret would take the lead, and we would all dodge inside. The door closed with a bang, and we would experience difficulty in breathing the hot air. The sand was too warm for our feet, so we would range ourselves along the wall on the boards and feel for the tubs full of water we knew were there. In silence, one after another, we would slip into our tub. Here again, Margaret would take command, and armed with a heavy, stiff brush, she would go over the body of the one in the tub while we waited in the sultry atmosphere for this first ritual to come to an end. When the final bather had climbed out onto the boards, Margaret would take a gourd, dip it into a tub, and with a showering swish, she would send the contents over the torrid stones. The hissing which followed was terrific. The atmosphere instantly changed from hot aridity, slightly tinged with wood smoke, into an enveloping cloud of hot steam, which rolled outward from the stones and blotted everything from sight. Time and again the swish of the water sounded. The pressure of the atmosphere around us seemed to increase as we stood mutely gasping for breath. The excessive heat opened our pores, and the sweat tumbled in little rivulets down our arms and legs. It was about this time that talk began to break out, coming from various directions, with only the peculiarities of the voices of each to designate the speaker's identity. It was wonderful to just stand there and feel vigor build up in the body. As we all became more accustomed to the intense, moist atmosphere, the older girls would clamber to the top bunks along the wall, where the heat was actually less bearable than near the sand, where I would crouch low against the edge of the boards. But merely enduring the hot, white, blinding, airy cloud was not sufficiently exhilarating, according to our Margaret. The long willow switches would be pulled down from the upper bunk, and she would begin to lay about her in widening circles until the body of each of us was bright red. "It is the only thing that will make your blood tingle," she would exclaim, permitting none of us to escape. However, she would finally turn the switch over to her sisters, who would belabor her with equal vigor. The Saturday night bath took a full hour, and when we were ready to leave, it meant a long trip of more than 300 feet to the back door of the farmhouse. To me, in the frigid winter, this seemed quite a chore. One of the girls would open the door slightly, reach her naked arm out, and bring in a bucket of icy water. She would often have to break the thin sheet of ice on the surface. With this Greenland smile, as Margaret used to say, we would take turns sloshing the chilling liquid over our bodies to close the pores the tremendous heat had opened so widely. It was a distinct shock, but most exhilarating. Each one of us submitted docilely to the drenching, as we knew it was our protection against colds, chills, and chest disturbances. Even after this frigid bath, it took courage to open the door and step out into as much as a foot of snow that for months had made a white mantle in the yard. But we did it, one after another, and I early learned that by going first and dashing away toward the house while the two younger girls helped their mother, I could escape being rolled in the snowbank or having handfuls of the chilling powder thrown over my body by the laughing girls. There are so many traditional cultures who used saunas and these sorts of things. And again, that's another thing that's like, we've lost something really special, and probably very health giving. It's like now I gotta frickin' spend thousands of dollars to get a sauna on my property. These sorts of practices where, it's not just that it's so health giving, but like the family and the community aspect of doing these things together, like that's something that at least in America and a lot of places these days you just don't really have anymore, which is really sad. And it's like so many of these kinds of things where it's like, okay, this is like they endured something that's like really difficult, really uncomfortable, but they were obviously way stronger than like modern people for having endured these things. And like part of me is just like, I'm sad that we don't have that. It's like, do I want to like be in a blazing, unbearably hot sauna and then go outside and like throw ice water on myself? Like, no. Like, not particularly, but also yes, I do. I want that because I realize that we've lost something in having lost those practices and that sort of ritual. I think it would do all of us well to create these sort of family rituals that, especially for our children too. I don't know how old, I think kids start doing saunas in other cultures like when they're quite young, but I don't know how old is appropriate for that. But certainly I couldn't beat my children with a birch switch or whatever it was. That would be illegal. I wouldn't want to do that anyway. Yeah, like some kind of like children and adults having these things to strengthen us and heal us and bring us together, like that's something we've definitely lost. So I'm going to skip ahead. The journey to America, how she finally got money to come to America, and the journey to America, definitely worth a read. This whole book is worth a read. I found it very enjoyable, even though it's not really exactly about how I overcame illness and pain naturally. Like I said, it's like, that's a little bit of it, but she had a very interesting life. So if you like that kind of thing, I would definitely give this a read. So I'm going to jump ahead to when she's already in America. And she crushed her legs in an accident in like a carriage or whatever, just above her ankles. And so was in the hospital for a time. Doctors wanted to amputate her legs because she had developed gangrene. And they said, you have to amputate your legs or you're going to die. But she refused and left the hospital and So we're gonna pick up right there. Her uncle, she would have her uncle carry her outside, 'cause obviously she could not walk, carry her outside and put her on a bench each morning before he left for his work in the factory. Before he left for his work in the factory each morning, he would carry me out into the yard where he deposited me on a long bench in the sunshine. Luckily for me, the summer was warm, yet the sun was not too scorchingly hot, but I could not move, and the pain was terrible. I could not stand any covering on my diseased legs, so for hours I lay there, sometimes gazing down at the ring of greenish blue which showed in the flesh just above the ankles, indicating plainly that the gangrenous organisms were slowly but surely increasing. Perhaps this undisturbed quiet through the long days was good for me. A new faith seemed to well up from within, and while I watched the creeping death, as my uncle sorrowfully called it, inching up both legs, I felt I was not going to die. The spirit of my grandmother seemed ever at my side, counseling me not to despair. I tried to eat everything green I could find, but my uncle refused to search for possible herbs. He was fearful that, through his ignorance, he would bring me poisoned vegetation. He did give me flowers, which I would consume ravenously after he left me in the morning. Also, by reaching down beside the bench, I was able to fill my stomach with ordinary grass, which my grandmother believed held every nutrient required for human health. And so, through the long days, I was able to obtain the kind of food which my body seemed to need, that is, both fresh from the earth and untreated with heat. By having my uncle move the bench around the yard on my plea that the sun would reach me better, I was able to supply my body with fresh grass each day. So this is what she did, and eventually her legs healed, and she pretty much completely recovered, which is crazy. I never really thought, people talk about, I'd already heard about wheatgrass juice and, juicing different grasses, like barley grass juice and stuff. I never really thought about the fact that you could just eat it. So, maybe this summer I'll try and eat some grass, see how it goes. That's another thing that we've lost, is just having very little knowledge of just nature and living outside of nature and having not much of a part of it. It's I just don't understand certain things. She talks about back in Lithuania, the bread that they would eat every day. It was rye and straw. They made bread with rye and straw, and straw, what do you even mean? Do you grind it up? I just think of long dry grass. How do you make bread out of that? I guess you grind it up. I don't know. It makes me think of this video I saw with some girl who had a lemon tree outside her yard, and she would buy lemons at the grocery store because she liked to use them in her tea and stuff. And one day a friend said to her, why do you buy lemons from the store? You have a lemon tree right there. And the girl would say, because I like to use the lemons in my tea and whatnot. And her friend would say, but you have a lemon tree right there, so why do you buy lemons from the store? And the girl would say, because I like to use them in my tea and my cooking and stuff. Because she didn't understand that she could just go pick the lemon off the tree, and it was the same thing as buying it from the store. She was like, I don't have to do anything to it. I can just take it and use it. She didn't understand, which seems kind of silly, but that's just how disconnected we are. And there are so many different things like that, just on different levels. It's I might have a better understanding than that girl does, but there are so many things I don't understand. It's wait a minute, you mean I can just eat the grass? I can just do that? I guess I can. Change of scenery, because I accidentally started a load of laundry 15 feet from where I was sitting. So clearly I'm deficient in wheatgrass juice. I'm sorry, Anne. I'm sorry. Please do not look down on me from your heavenly station and be disappointed. I'm so sorry. All right, so when Anne was in America, she started to physically not be doing very well. And here's what she describes. Strange, unhealthy conditions seemed to overtake my body. I found that my stomach was often upset. Many times I would pretend to be resting by the roadside so that nobody would notice me when I would vomit. Pimples began to break the evenness of my face, and boils began to appear under my arms and along the back of my neck. Even the soft food I was eating burned my gums and brought blood to the surfaces around my teeth. In the end, disheartened and racked by toothaches, I sought a local dentist without consulting my father. She was still a teenager, I believe here. The dentist removed 4 of my back teeth as having rotted too much to save. Yet when I had arrived in America, there was not a cavity in my mouth, and my teeth were perfectly aligned thanks to the care of my grandmother. Perhaps that disaster of losing my 4 back teeth, my grandmother had a perfect set despite her age, made me realize that the wonderful tasting food of America was not healthful. For the first time, I began to understand what the old men, friends of mine along the route to the hog pens, meant when they said I would soon wish the coarse, dark bread of Europe was the staple article of food in Middleborough. The freshly threshed and ground whole grain made into sun-baked, chewy, flavorful loaves, and the freshly made butter from raw goat's milk had contained something vital to health that was missing from the soft, sweet, white breads and pastries of America. I feel you, girl. I feel you. It's another thing, it's like, bread and butter. Like, okay. Bread has sustained nations for thousands of years. And, like, who doesn't want to live off of bread and butter? That's, like, the ideal diet. But now all these freaking food scientists in America have destroyed our wheat, and now everyone can't digest it, and it makes us sick. Like, talk about evil. It sucks, man. It sucks. It's funny, like, I watch the YouTube video Townsends, which are amazing, if you've never seen. But, you know, they talk about, like, what poor people ate in early America sometimes and show different recipes and whatnot. And they're like, yeah, like all these different things, like breads and like porridge, and like you just put a bunch of butter in it and like that's what you eat. And it's like, that rules actually. Like I really kind of wish that was my diet. Like, you know, and then with just like seasonal offerings to go with it, you know, it's like, oh, I can go pick the raspberries that are outside that are ripe, or I can gather some fresh greens when they're abounding in like spring and summer, and you know, growing other vegetables, but then like most of your diet being bread and butter. That's like the dream, man. That's the dream. So we're gonna fast forward a bit. A lot happens in this book. Again, her life story is very interesting, so I highly recommend if you're into that sort of thing. But we're gonna fast forward. She actually became a minister, and so that's a little bit of a part of it. I haven't mentioned, but her grandmother's faith and her faith are very important aspects of this book as well, which I love. But we're gonna fast forward to when she just started really breaking down physically, like, you know, as she gets older, and she's just working in like factories and all this kind of stuff, working herself to the bone, and she starts to have just terrible physical problems that can't just be kind of ignored, you know. And so she starts incorporating, she thinks back to in Europe and how her grandmother was always using weeds, herbs that were growing wild in her healing. And so Anne started taking in lots of weeds. She would go out and gather weeds from wherever she could, learned about the different kinds that were in her area, and would eat them and juice them. And it really started helping her with her health. She got involved with a health magazine that was around at the time. I forget what it's called, but it's gonna come up on one of these pages and I'll tell you. And that's how she eventually came to discover wheatgrass and its incredible health benefits. So we're gonna go there now. While I had no intention of altogether abandoning the precious weeds which had given me my real nourishment for the past 12 months and which I had brought to many people's attention, I immediately set about trying to learn more of the nutrients of grass and its other characteristics. I felt that here was something I might place beside the weeds. Here she is speaking with a man, Dr. G.H. Earp Thomas of Highbridge, New Jersey, probably the leading grass expert of the world. He had spent half a century in his research for the ideal grass combination for livestock. So this is him speaking.
Well, Anne, during my 50-odd years as a soil analyst in New Zealand, Canada, and the United States, my first test of a grass is to put some in my mouth and chew it to taste the flavor. Remember, grass is the only vegetation on the face of the earth that will healthfully support an animal from birth to a prime old age. I am surprised that more attention has not been given to this kind of vegetation as a food for human beings. Oh, the magazine is called The Health Guardian. I wonder if it's still around. I don't know. The Health Guardian, she puts out asks for support from their readers that she's going to research different kinds of grasses. And so she says, to my delight, I received hundreds of varieties of seeds from every country in which the Health Guardian had readers. When I sorted up the piles of grass seed that had come in the mail, I found pampas seed from Argentina, buffalo grass seed from Nebraska, bamboo seed from Japan, rice from China, etc. When the publisher visited me to view the results of the grass seed sowing experiment which I'd undertaken, I had the 7 most promising specimens transplanted into little flower pots on the table ready for his inspection. In many of the little squared off sections of the seedbed, the slower growing grasses had not even peeped above the surface of the soil. Lifting each small flower pot in turn, the publisher looked at it and remarked, "Which one is this? It is twice as tall and thick as the others and has unusual vitality." "Wheat," I replied. "Wheat," he said, "I should have guessed it. That grain fills the storehouses of the civilized world. It is the sole agricultural product that has come down to us from the tombs of the early Egyptians." After finding this quick-growing vital grass to be one of the richest in vitamins, minerals, and amino acids, I chose to work with it alone. And so wheatgrass, the green sprouts of ordinary wheat in which nature collects the life-giving rays of the sun, the nourishment of the air, and the minerals from the water and the soil, at that time became a part of the plan. I brought into my hands a simple homemade food beverage which subsequent events suggested was capable of helping Mother Nature to mend shattered health and to extend the span of life. Thus, wheatgrass juice is born. Again, I've never had the pleasure, but I will someday. I'll try it. So I'm going to be wrapping up here soon, but before I go, she gives many, many testimonials of people who were helped by wheatgrass. She started going around to elderly people who were just homebound, people who had been declared incurable by modern medicine, many of them just bedridden, living in their little apartments, whatever. And she started going around and delivering fresh wheatgrass juice to them every day. And there's some pretty amazing experiences here, or whatever, I can't think of the word. I need wheatgrass. So I just want to read you a couple of them. Many of these unfortunate men and women were actually bedridden, weak, emaciated, and unable even to make the journey down the often rickety stairs. But I took each one in turn, talking with him, listening carefully as each recited his story, and emphasized that as long as the spark of life was still within the body, there was not only hope for improvement, but possibly permanent relief from pain. At this time, the wheatgrass route included a multiple sclerosis victim. This little woman had existed miserably in bed for months. She viewed each passing day as a mere step closer to the inevitable when I began furnishing her regularly with the wheatgrass juice. Within a month, this sufferer was out of bed, taking short walks, and, for the first time in years, visited a beauty parlor. "My prayers have been answered," was her choking comment as new hope rose within her. It might also be well to relate another miracle, this time the story of a woman in her 70s who had been a registered nurse and who had fallen victim to ulcers that would not heal. She was a resident of a public nursing home in Boston. She had been an invalid for a long time and was so badly off, her doctor and public officials were already making plans for her burial. She was suffering with ulcers in several parts of her digestive system and with running surface eruptions as follows: 1 an inch deep and inches across on the back of her neck, and 2 additional oozing sores on her forehead and right arm. These had not healed in years. Convinced that what she had prayed for was near, she asked a friend to bring her a minister. In that capacity, I was called. While I had been told of her serious condition, I was actually unprepared for the hopeless, helpless, disheveled sufferer I found. For weeks, the poor creature had literally lived in a straitjacket, seated in a chair, her arms tied to its arms so she could not scratch her terribly itchy sores. Immovable, her life had been truly a living death. I acted quickly. That afternoon, I visited the city welfare officials and received their consent to move her to a place where I could visit her regularly and see to her comfort. An ambulance made the change the following morning. Through her adoption of the simple diet and taking the wheatgrass juice regularly, the itching was alleviated. This made possible the freeing of her arms. Her improvement, which soon became more evident, was both physical and mental. During the first week on the wheatgrass regimen, she was able to sit upright and smile, the first smile in many months, according to an astonished and delighted friend. Her mental discouragement vanished. She looked ahead hopefully. Within a month, the running sores on her forehead and arm healed. The angry one, an inch deep on her neck, was slowly scabbing over. Of the dozens of individuals with whom I worked during those 12 busy months, most had not worked steadily for several years. Yet, as I investigated the results of these daily calls at a later date, I learned that 3 had found regular employment, many had part-time jobs, and not a single one remained bedridden. Without exception, all were viewing the future hopefully. So from there, she eventually opened up her first little healing center, which was called the Homestead, and then later on opened up the Hippocrates Institute in Boston, which she continued to work at until her death, unfortunate death in her 80s from smoke inhalation from a house fire. Bummer, right? Bummer. Very sad. And that's where the book ends, is the opening of the Hippocrates Institute. Final thoughts. I think that life is hard for most people, no matter what. No matter what time and place where you live. Some people obviously have had it much harder than others. But the thing about the modern age that is kind of, I think, unique and discouraging maybe, is that we've done all these things to try to make life easier and more convenient, but they have consequences, which have ended up making us deal with different sorts of hardships. Now, again, I'm really glad that I don't live in war-torn Europe, okay? I'm happy to be here in America where I'm relatively safe and nourished, sort of. That's one of the hardships, is trying to not poison yourself through our food supply requires effort, and it's actually pretty difficult. So yeah, it's there are trade-offs, and I don't ever want to say that I'm not grateful for where I'm at. Something that's wonderful about the modern age is we have so much information at our fingertips that I can recognize that I've lost, that there's something that we've lost, that I haven't been, passed down these healing modalities and ways to work with things in my environment for healing and nourishment, and I haven't been given that information, just from my parents and grandparents and great-grandparents, as most people did throughout history, unless you were dying in a war or something, or from Viking raiders or whatever the heck else crazy stuff happened throughout history. There's a lot of really bad stuff. So again, I'm grateful. I'll keep saying that. I'm sorry. Mostly to remind myself to be grateful. But now, with the internet, the magic of the internet, I can learn a lot of that stuff. And like I said, probably there's a lot of knowledge that's just been lost to time. But I can go online and read books, go to the library or buy books online, and I can read and I can learn how to do a lot of that stuff myself. Is it kind of a pain in the butt? Is it harder for me as a not very smart person to teach myself rather than being taught by a wise grandma? Yes, but it can be done, and I'm going to continue working on it. And someday I will try wheatgrass juice. I've wanted to for a long time, but and it doesn't seem too hard. She has other books, and there's plenty of books about wheatgrass and going online, about how to grow wheatgrass. Even if you don't have a small space, you grow it indoors. But I'd have to figure out trays, soil. I have cats. That's also kind of a problem. They would definitely cause a problem. So there's things to figure out, and then getting some sort of thing to juice it too. She never talks about what she uses to juice her grasses and weeds in this book, so I don't know. But I mean, like, there's been manual juicers for like ever. Anyway, those are my thoughts. That's my commentary on Why Suffer by Ann Wigmore. I look backwards to you. I don't know how to film. I don't know how to film anything. Why Suffer by Ann Wigmore. Check it out. Very good book. Been wanting to read it for a long time. I got this on Thrift Books. You can also purchase it from the Hippocrates Institute website. I'll put a link down below. They have it on their website for like $15. Yeah, so check it out, and thank you so much for watching. Bye.